Book Talk podcasts can provide gentle choice reading accountability, target presentation of knowledge and speaking skills, and build a library of book recommendations for all your future students. Doesn't sound terrible, right? Today on the podcast, I'm going to walk you through how to launch a Book Talk podcast with your students and why it will be fantastic. Welcome to the Spark Creativity Teacher Podcast, a podcast for English teachers looking for more creativity, more engagement, more joy, and no more scripted curriculum, lesson planning ruts, or boring book lists. I'm Betsy Potash, and I'm honored you're trusting me to help. You're not alone on this creative journey anymore. Okay, so I recently created a full curriculum for a Book Talk podcast project, and it was so much fun, and I'm just kind of going to walk you through the steps. If you're in the Lighthouse, then you could use the curriculum that I created, or you can just check out some visuals of it in the show notes today if you want to be inspired to create your own. So let's kind of talk about what this looks like. The first step in any great book talk podcast project, of course, is going to have students read a book. So they could read it for your choice reading unit, for a book club, or as part of your ongoing choice reading program. If you aren't doing book clubs or choice reading at this point, I'm maybe going to send you back to episode 142, all about building a choice reading culture, because that is something that I believe is so important, and I don't want you to skip over that. So I do think this project goes really well with some kind of choice reading. Maybe we'll call that step 0. Have your students be reading something that was their own free choice. Now, once you've had them read their book and you're looking for this little bit of gentle accountability, a Book Talk podcast is a really cool way to authentically get them sharing a review that other students can genuinely benefit from. And this is kind of my guiding light when it comes to choice reading accountability. I don't want students to be accountable to me. I don't want them to feel like they're just proving that they read their book. I want them to be sharing their takeaway, their review with each other, whether that's through a book trailer or a one-pager or a literary food truck or this idea today, the Book Talk podcast. Because in the end, it's about developing this reading culture in class. So you're going to present it to your students that way as they're finishing up their books through sort of whatever venue you're having them read, choice reading, book clubs. Let them know they're going to be recording a really quick podcast review of their book that their classmates are going to be able to access and listen to if they're thinking about reading the book. You might want to call this show Why Read Bad Books? Just like a little joke to remind students they can give a positive review or they can give a negative review. They're really helping their peers figure out what to read. Let's say they've finished their book, you have rolled out the idea of the project, and now you're going to kind of frame it for them. What do they have to do? This doesn't have to be a super complicated project. It doesn't have to take you 2 weeks in class. It can just be a day or two, and it's going to end up with this helpful library of book reviews. So you're just going to kind of give students some components. What needs to go into their script here? And these are the ones I suggest. I would suggest you have them tease the plot. For anybody to really know if they want to read a book, they have to have some idea of the plot, right? So have them tease the plot. Have them talk a little bit about the author's style. Was this a novel in verse? Was it really fast-paced? Was it dramatic? Was it creepy? Did it have really beautiful sensory imagery? Have them explain a little bit about the author's style and what they thought about it. That will help a future reader decide whether or not to read it. Have them mention the genre of the book. And then finally, have them talk about how the book relates to other books. This can honestly, for me, be one of the most helpful ways to help a student understand whether they want to read a book. It's to compare it to other books in the universe of fiction. So give your students a few examples, like say, you might love this book if you loved Percy Jackson and Skandar and the Unicorn. It's a similar, like really fast-paced, dramatic, fun, fictional universe. Or you might love this book if you are super into Jason Reynolds. It reminds me of some of the storylines in the Track series where it's about a middle school student who's like encountering some obstacles, but it's really inspiring and the writing is really beautiful. Or whatever, right? Ask them to make some of those kinds of comparisons to help their future listeners kind of understand what they're getting into. Remind them that the goal of this short podcast is to help their classmates decide whether or not to read the book. It is not just for a grade. It is not just to check some box. People are going to be listening to this podcast to decide whether or not to read a book, and they're not going to be happy if you say it was like your favorite book of all time and then it's terrible. So just help them to keep that authentic audience in mind. I think that's so important. Okay, as you begin drafting your scripts, if you want, I'm including in the show notes a sample script for a show on Jason Reynolds' Long Way Down. So if you want, you could show them that example or read it out loud to them, or you could record your own little short podcast about a book that you love to give them as a model. And then obviously in future years, you're going to have dozens and dozens of models that you can show from years past. When it comes to having them actually record their scripts, don't be nervous. I know that the tech is the scariest part of any podcast project, but it really doesn't have to be. Students can write out their full script or they can write out bullet points, whatever they feel more comfortable with. Sometimes the easiest thing to do, in my opinion as a speaker, is to write the full script, but then kind of narrow it down to bullet points and not actually read every single word. And then they can go to the website Vocaroo. You've heard me talk about it before. It's the simplest website in the world on Chrome. They just click the big red button in the middle of the page, read their script, and then click off to record, like to finish the recording. And then they can upload their sound file. Once they grab it from Vocaroo, they can put it on Drive, make the settings public, and now they just have a link to their podcast. Anyone can listen. So they can send it to you, of course. And let's talk about what you can do with it. So the final stage here is for you to create a linked library of all the episodes. Now, I think this is just such a fun aspect of it. If you want, you can have students create like a little thumbnail for their show in Canva that gives other students a hint at what they're going to see visually, or you can just have a slide with all the different titles of the reviews that's clickable. Once you have all the links from students, it's just going to be really easy to design that. And then you can think about how you want to use it. You can, after you grade them, you can kind of mentally star the ones that were really strong and maybe play them in class sometimes as book talks. Or when there are times when you know a lot of kids are looking for a new book, like right before a break or at the start of a new term, you can open up that slide, send it out to everybody and say, like, take 10 minutes here and I want you to listen to the book talk podcasts for 5 books that you think you might want to choose as your next read. And kids can just put their headphones in and start listening, and they're going to hear the reviews of their classmates. Now, over time, as you go from year to year, you might want to do some culling, build up a playlist of the strongest book review podcasts from past years. And eventually, imagine doing this for 3 or 4 years, you're going to maybe have 100 really stellar book talk podcast reviews that become this awesome resource for your classroom. Maybe you even want to make it a resource across the whole school. You could get department team members involved so that this is just like this really neat resource in your department, in your community. Thanks so much for joining me today to talk about the Book Talk Podcast Project. It's such a great way to practice speaking and presentation of knowledge skills while also promoting all the many wonderful books in your choice reading program. Until next time, take care of yourself and stay creative.